That was the first thought that hit when she opened the door. Mia Carter. 44. My neighbor's mom. Always put together in this quiet, unbothered way, like she'd stopped trying to impress anyone years ago and somehow became more magnetic because of it. She didn't smile big, just a small tug at the corner of her mouth that felt more personal than a welcome should. Her hair was pinned up loosely, a few strands falling near her neck like they'd escaped on purpose. She stepped aside and said, "Come in," but her tone made it sound like she'd been waiting, not just being polite. I told myself I was only there to drop off the charger her son borrowed, nothing more. But she closed the door behind me, slowly. And in that soft, closing click, the rest of the world felt shut out. The living room was warm but dim, like late afternoon had decided to stay and settle in the corners. She walked ahead of me, barefoot, her sweater slipping slightly off one shoulder, not in a careless way, more like the fabric knew where it wanted to rest. I tried not to look at the shape of her legs under those fitted lounge pants, but pretending not to notice her felt more obvious than staring. She turned, holding the charger between two fingers. "You could have just left it with him tomorrow," she said. Not accusing. Not teasing. Just observing me. "I was passing by," I said, though the truth was I wasn't. I'd thought about coming over twice before actually knocking. She nodded, but her eyes didn't match the gesture. They stayed on me a moment too long, studying, maybe. Or deciding something. There was an unreadable softness there, like she was listening to a conversation I wasn't hearing. She moved to sit on the sofa but paused halfway before lowering herself. Then she looked at the space beside her and tapped it once. "Sit next to me." Not "have a seat," not "you can stay for a minute," just that. Simple. Direct. But there was something in the quiet behind the words that made it feel like a choice I'd already made. I sat. Not too close. Not far enough to be casual. The cushion dipped under her weight, and the slightest shift made my knee brush hers. She didn't move away. There was no noise, no TV, no music, just the hum of whatever passed as silence in a house where someone else used to live. I could almost hear her breathing, that slow kind of inhale people do when they don't want to seem nervous. Or maybe she wasn't nervous at all. Maybe that was just me. She rested her elbow along the back of the couch, and her left hand, dropped lightly onto the space between us. Not touching me. Not inviting. Just there. Close enough to notice the shape of her fingers, the soft glint of a ring she wasn't wearing anymore. Her gaze drifted, not to the window, not to the room, just somewhere above my shoulder, like she was remembering a thought she hadn't decided to share. When she looked back at me, she didn't speak right away. That pause held more weight than anything she could have said. "You've gotten taller," she said quietly, like she was reminding herself I wasn't the kid who used to ride bikes with her son. Her voice didn't change, but something in it dipped lower, warmer. I should have laughed or shrugged, but the air between us made words feel clumsy. So I just watched her hand, and maybe she knew I was, because a moment later, she moved it. Not much. Just a slow, thoughtless shift that let the back of her fingers brush against my arm. Light. Barely there. But every nerve under my skin reacted like she'd pressed her whole palm against me. She didn't apologize. Didn't pull back. The touch wasn't loud, but it said something neither of us named. Before I could breathe something out, an answer, a question, anything, there was a sound from the hallway. A door handle turning. And her eyes flicked toward it, but her hand stayed exactly where it was. The door down the hallway didn't open, just the rusted click of the handle shifting and then quiet again. Maybe pipes. Maybe the house settling. Maybe someone changing their mind about coming out. But her eyes stayed on that hallway a second too long, like she was weighing something. When she looked back at me, nothing in her face gave away what she'd just decided. Only then did she move her hand from where it had been resting near me, slowly, quietly, like drawing back a confession. "I thought you'd be out tonight," she said, voice even again. The kind of even that covers something. I lied. I hadn't made plans. I'd just been thinking about her kitchen light being on when I walked past earlier. She didn't question it, just nodded once and folded one leg under herself on the couch. The way her sweater shifted made a strap slide slightly down her shoulder, and I tried not to look, but not looking made me notice more. People talk about her, not in a cruel way, just that cautious tone neighbors use when they don't understand why a woman that stunning lives alone now. Her husband left 2 years ago, after a job relocation turned into something else. He didn't come back. She never chased him. She just stayed, quietly rearranging her life around the empty space he left. My mom used to check in on her, bring casseroles, ask if she needed help around the house. After a while, those visits stopped. Some people don't know how to stay once the sympathy window closes. I only knew fragments. Her son moved out months ago for school, and the silence in her house seemed deeper since then. I'd catch glimpses of her watering plants at sunset or sitting on the porch with a book she wasn't reading. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, fingers brushing the curve of her neck as she settled back. "I forget how quiet it gets," she said, eyes drifting toward the empty hallway again. I waited for her to say more, but she didn't. I wondered if she missed being asked how her day was, or if she preferred not having to answer. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't reach for it. Her eyes flicked to the sound, then back to me, lingering in a way that made it obvious she'd noticed I ignored it. She exhaled softly, not quite a sigh. "Does your mother know you're here?" It wasn't judgment, it was something more cautious. Maybe she remembered when I was younger, always running through her backyard barefoot. Maybe she was reminding herself that she knew me then, and that made this, whatever this was, unsteady. "She thinks I'm out with friends," I said quietly. Her lips parted, like she might respond, but she didn't. Instead, she reached for the mug on the coffee table, lifting it with both hands. The steam was gone. She wasn't drinking it, just holding something warm. "You'll get people talking," she said finally, though her tone was unreadable. "Would it bother you?" I asked before I could think better of it. That got a real reaction, small, controlled, but sharp around the edges. She blinked once, slowly, and set the mug down. "What bothers me is that you don't seem to care if they do," she said, and there was something quietly unguarded in her voice, like fear wearing a calm face. I opened my mouth to say I didn't care because it was just a charger, because we weren't doing anything, but that would have been a lie, and both of us would have known it. Instead, I said nothing. The silence thickened, but not in a way that pushed me away. More like it asked if I was going to stay in it with her. She shifted, resting one arm along the back of the couch again. This time, when her fingers brushed my shoulder, it wasn't an accident. It wasn't bold either, just a soft pause of skin against fabric. "You're not a kid anymore," she said eventually, almost to herself. I didn't answer. I didn't trust my voice not to make it worse, or better. Her hand stayed there a beat too long before she pulled it back to her lap, folding both hands together. Maybe she thought that brief touch had said more than either of us should hear. She glanced toward the window. The sky outside had gone purple-blue, the kind that makes everything inside look softer, more private. I followed her gaze. When I looked back at her, she was already looking at me. Neither of us spoke. But the space between us changed shape, closer, somehow, without either of us moving. She didn't touch me again. I didn't lean away. And for the first time, I got the feeling we'd both stopped pretending this was harmless. She didn't ask me to leave, and I didn't pretend I should. The quiet in the room wasn't comfortable anymore, it was loaded. Every breath, every shift of weight, every glance carried something we both pretended not to name. Her hand rested in her lap now, fingers loosely interlaced, but I could still feel the ghost of where she'd touched my shoulder. She didn't look away from me this time. She didn't smile either. My phone buzzed again. Same pocket. Probably the same friend asking why I hadn't shown up to anything tonight. I didn't check. But the sound made her shift slightly, like it reminded her of reality pressing at the edges. "You should get that," she said. "I don't want to." The answer landed between us, heavier than I meant it to. She inhaled once, her lips parting like she almost had a reply, but nothing came out. Her eyes flicked to the hallway again, then the front door, then back to me. Her son had a key. My mother knew this address by memory. Neighbors sometimes dropped by unannounced. The risk wasn't dramatic, it was subtle, quiet, ordinary. Maybe that was worse. Something in the air tilted then, and she moved without thinking, leaning forward just slightly to reach for the charger I'd left on the coffee table. The hem of her sweater brushed my knee. Her hair slipped from behind her ear, falling toward me as she picked up the cable. I reached to take it at the exact moment she turned to hand it over, our hands meeting halfway. Not a brush this time. Full contact. Warm. Intentional only by accident. Neither of us pulled back. For a second, there was no sound, not even the low hum of the fridge in the kitchen. Just her breath, and mine, and the tension of not moving though everything in my body wanted to. She looked down at our hands first. Then up at me. Her eyes didn't widen or dart away, they narrowed just slightly, like she was trying to stop herself from making a decision she already knew she wanted. I leaned in before I realized I was doing it. Not close enough to touch her face, but close enough to feel the soft exhale from her parted lips. Her gaze dropped to my mouth for the briefest second, and that was it. That was the shift. The point where turning back became pretending. The sound came at the worst possible moment, a knock at the front door. She jolted, not visibly, but I felt it in the tiny twitch of her fingers against mine before she pulled away. The charger slipped from both our hands and landed on the carpet with a dull thud. We didn't speak. The knock came again, 2 small taps, like someone testing if anyone was home. She stood. Not quickly. Not slowly. Just carefully, as if one wrong move would spill everything onto the floor. I stayed seated, every muscle in me caught between standing and staying frozen. "Stay here," she said quietly, already moving toward the door. Her voice wasn't stern, but it left no room for argument. I watched the line of her shoulders as she walked down the short hall. She didn't turn back. I heard the chain slide, the door open a few inches, and her voice, lower than usual. "A neighbor." I couldn't hear the words, just the polite murmur of an exchange that shouldn't have mattered but suddenly did. I closed my eyes, letting the tension burn through me without anywhere to go. When I opened them again, she was back in the room, closing the door behind her with her back turned to me. For a moment she stayed like that, one hand still on the doorknob. Then she let go, shoulders rising once, then falling. She turned. Neither of us found the charger on the floor. And neither of us sat back down. She didn't bother pretending nothing had happened. The second the front door clicked back into place, something in her stopped hiding. Not in a bold way, more like someone who'd been holding their breath for too long and finally let it go. I was still standing in the middle of the room when she turned toward me. She didn't come closer right away. She just looked, really looked, like she was searching for the part of me that still made this wrong. "Was that your mother?" I asked quietly, because not asking anything felt dangerous. She shook her head once. "No. Mrs. Laird from next door." She thought she saw a package on the porch that wasn't there. I nodded, though the words barely registered. My pulse hadn't gone down since the knock. Neither had hers. I could tell by the way she pressed her tongue to the inside of her cheek, a small tell she probably didn't know she had. I took one step toward her. Then another. She stayed still. "You almost answered the door with me standing right there," I said, voice lower than I meant it to be. "You were supposed to stay out of sight," she replied. The words weren't scolding, but there was something frayed underneath them, panic, anger, want. I couldn't tell. Maybe she couldn't either. "You didn't tell me to move." Her jaw tensed, not in irritation, more in restraint. I shouldn't have to. I should have backed off. I should have given her space. Instead I closed the last bit of distance between us. She didn't retreat, but every part of her seemed to go very still, like the slightest touch could undo her. "Do you want me to leave?" I asked. She didn't answer right away. Her eyes flicked from mine to my mouth, then down to the space between us. The air felt hot. Heavy. Slow. Her voice was barely above a whisper when she said, "I don't know what I want right now." Except she did. And so did I. I lifted a hand before I could talk myself out of it. My fingers stopped just short of her hair, close enough to feel the heat rising from her skin. I waited. Not for permission exactly. More for her not to stop me. She didn't. So I tucked one loose strand behind her ear, my knuckles grazing the side of her face. Soft skin. Warm. She exhaled a breath she'd been holding, and the sound of it just about shattered me. "This is a mistake," she murmured, but she didn't move. "Then why aren't you stepping away?" Her eyes snapped to mine, sharp for a heartbeat, then softened with something almost like defeat. "Or honesty." "You're 23, she said. It sounded like a reminder to herself more than a warning to me. "And you're not," I said quietly. Her breath hitched, not hurt, not offended, just impacted. My hand was still near her face, and without realizing it, my thumb brushed the angle of her jaw. She closed her eyes for a second. Just one. When they opened again, the guard she wore so tightly had slipped. "You don't understand what people will say." "Maybe I don't care." She let out a quiet, humorless sound. Not a laugh. More like disbelief struggling to stay steady. "You should," she said, but her voice was unsteady now. "I do." I moved closer, close enough that if either of us leaned forward another inch, there wouldn't be space left to argue. Her hands were at her sides, fingers curled slightly, like she was stopping herself from reaching for me. Her eyes dropped to my lips again before she caught herself. "If you don't want this," I said softly, "tell me to go." She didn't. She didn't step closer either, but the silence between us answered for her. And just as I leaned in, close enough to feel the warmth of her breath against my mouth, a phone rang. Not mine. Hers. From somewhere down the hall. A sharp, inevitable pull back to reality. But neither of us moved. The ringtone cut through the space between us like a blade, sharp, unwelcome, impossible to ignore. She didn't move at first. Neither did I. Her breath was still brushing my lips, and for a second, I thought she might let it ring. Then her eyes flicked to the hallway, and something in her posture changed, rigid, alert, almost guilty. She stepped back. Just one small step, but it carried the weight of 10. The air cooled instantly. She started, but didn't finish. I didn't stop her. She brushed past me to get to the hallway, and the back of her hand caught against mine, accidental, but not harmless. I felt the tremor in her fingers even though she didn't look at me. The phone went silent before she reached it. She disappeared around the corner anyway. I stayed where I was, pulse pounding through my ribs, fighting the pull to follow. The room still held the shape of us, our interruption, the breath we hadn't taken. When she came back, she wasn't holding her phone. Her expression was unreadable, but not empty. If anything, it looked like something had already happened in the seconds she'd been gone. "Who was it?" I asked. She hesitated. "Then, your mother." My chest tightened. "How?" "She called me," she said quietly. "She said you weren't answering your phone and asked if you were here." The world tilted. "What did you tell her?" "That you stopped by to drop something off." A pause. "And that you'd already left." I hadn't moved an inch, but suddenly I felt exposed. "Why would she call you?" Her gaze flicked toward me, uncertain, then steady. "She's called me before. She likes to check in. She thinks I look out for you." My heartbeat stuttered. The room felt smaller. Closer. Riskier. "And do you?" I asked, not sure why I said it. She didn't answer that. Instead, she crossed her arms, not defensive, just something to do with her hands. When she asked if you were still here, she said, voice softer now, I lied. Without even hesitating. Her eyes met mine then, unflinching, conflicted, charged. There was no pretending after that. If she finds out, I started. She will, she said, cutting in gently. Not with drama, but certainty. People always do. Eventually. Something shifted in me then, not a retreat, not panic. Just clarity. You regret lying? I asked. She shook her head once, and that answer landed deeper than any confession could have. The silence between us wasn't the same silence from earlier. It wasn't careful anymore. It was dangerous in a different way, truth sitting too close to the surface. I stepped toward her. Slowly. Deliberately. She stayed where she was, but the slight tremble in the way she drew in a breath wasn't lost on me. Mia, I said her name for the first time out loud, and something in her stilled. Her arms loosened. Not quite falling to her sides, but no longer a barrier. I shouldn't have lied, she murmured. But you did. Our eyes locked. And I don't think you want to take it back, I added. Her breath caught, not because I was wrong, but because I wasn't. She closed the last of the distance, not with her body, but with her voice. If you stay, she said, barely above a whisper, everything changes. I didn't blink. Maybe it already has. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Neither of us moved back. And this time, no phone, no knock, no excuse stood between us for a long moment. Neither of us moved. We just stood there, close enough to feel each other's body heat, close enough to hear the way breath shortened when words couldn't carry everything. She was the first to break the stillness, though barely. A slow inhale. A shift of her weight. A flicker of uncertainty in eyes that usually knew exactly where to land. You should go, she whispered. But she didn't step back when she said it. The space between us wasn't even a full breath. I could see the faint rise and fall of her chest, the pulse at her throat, the way her lips parted like she wanted to add something, but couldn't. I searched her face, looking for the no she wasn't saying. Is that what you want? I asked quietly. Her gaze dropped to the floor, then to my mouth, then back to my eyes. What I want, she murmured, is the problem. My hand lifted before I even thought it through. I didn't touch her, just hovered, fingers inches from her cheek, close enough that she could step away if she wanted to. She didn't. If I touch you, I said, I won't be able to pretend anymore. Her breath caught. She let her eyes close for just a second too honest, too revealing. When she opened them again, her voice was softer. I haven't pretended since the day you carried those boxes up my stairs. I just didn't, let it show. The admission landed in my chest like gravity. I let my hand bridge the last inch, the back of my fingers grazing her jaw, feather-light. Her skin was warm, and the contact felt like something we'd both already imagined 100 different ways. She didn't stop me. Her hand came up slowly, fingers brushing the inside of my wrist, not pulling me closer, not pushing me away. Just feeling the shape of what we were about to choose. If we do this, she said, voice barely there, nothing goes back to normal. I brought my forehead close to hers, our noses almost touching. Maybe normal was the lie. That broke something, gently, like a thread snapping under its own weight. She leaned in a fraction closer, eyes locked to mine. The air between us tightened, thick, charged, like the world had narrowed to a heartbeat's width. My thumb traced the line where her jaw met her ear, and she exhaled like she'd been holding that breath all week. Then she said it, quiet, raw, unguarded. I'm scared of wanting you. I didn't pull back. I'm scared of not letting myself. Her fingers slid from my wrist to my hand, finally lacing with mine. A choice, not an accident. The silence that followed wasn't hesitation, it was surrender finding its shape. She leaned into me fully then, her body fitting against mine like it had always been meant to close that distance. My other hand settled at her waist, and she didn't flinch, didn't question, didn't retreat. Her forehead rested against my cheek, her voice barely brushing my skin when she spoke. Then don't let go. I wasn't planning to. No one interrupted. No phone. No footsteps. No reason left to pretend. She pulled back just enough to meet my eyes, and whatever fear remained was wrapped in something stronger: recognition. Relief. Want that no longer hid behind polite restraint. We hadn't kissed yet. We didn't need to. The decision had already been made, by the lies we stopped telling ourselves, by the space we didn't leave between us. When she finally whispered my name, it wasn't a warning. It was an answer. Neither of us rushed to speak, because nothing about that moment felt rushed. Her hand was still threaded with mine, her body still close enough that I could feel the steady rise of her breathing settle into something calmer, not less intense, just less afraid. She was the first to shift, not away, but inward. Her head rested lightly on my chest, like she'd been holding herself upright for too long and finally let the weight go. I wrapped an arm around her without thinking, and when she exhaled, I felt the sound more than I heard it. "You're too young," she murmured after a beat, the words tired rather than argumentative. "You've said that without saying it since the day we met," I replied softly. She didn't deny it. Her fingers traced an absent-minded line across the back of my hand, slow and uncertain. "People talk. They'll always talk," I said. "About something. Might as well let them pick something true." She let out a quiet breath that wasn't quite a laugh but wasn't pain either. "You make it sound simple." "Not simple," I said, leaning back just enough to see her face, "just worth it." Her eyes held mine, searching, maybe for doubt, maybe for the part of me she thought might still back away. Whatever she looked for, she didn't find a reason to step back. Not this time. She lifted her hand to my face, her palm resting gently against my cheek, thumb brushing the corner of my mouth. The touch wasn't urgent or testing, it was acknowledgement. Acceptance. Maybe the first honest one we'd shared without pulling away. "I spent half my adulthood trying not to need anyone," she said quietly. "And now you show up at the worst possible time and make it worse?" I offered. She shook her head once. "Make it harder not to feel anything." We stood there another moment, lingering in the closeness, heads bent toward each other, no longer pretending the space was accidental. I brushed a strand of hair from her face, letting my fingers linger near her temple. "You know I'm not walking out that door and pretending this didn't happen." She gave the smallest nod, like she'd known it too but needed to hear it aloud. Then, slowly, she rested her forehead against mine. We stayed like that, eyes closed, breaths evening out, no distance left to misinterpret. "You scare me," she whispered. There was no drama in it, just truth. "You scare me too." I let my thumb rest over the curve of her knuckles. "That hasn't stopped me yet." A small silence followed, but not the kind we'd learned to fear. This one settled around us like something shared, not avoided. She pulled back just enough to look at me fully. "You won't always understand me." "Then I'll listen." "You'll make mistakes," she warned. "So will you." Her lips curved, the ghost of something that might become a smile, something that had been waiting behind caution and restraint for too long. "And you're really not leaving?" I shook my head. "Not unless you ask me to." She didn't. Instead, she leaned in, slow, unhurried, and pressed a kiss to the corner of my mouth. Not quite a first kiss, not quite anything else, just a promise wrapped in restraint. It lingered, soft and warm and real, and when she drew back, I felt the shift between us settle into something that didn't need hiding. We moved to the couch, not letting go of each other's hands. She sat close, closer than habit, closer than caution, and I could feel the warmth of her thigh against mine, the soft brush of her shoulder leaning into me. The room felt different now. Not smaller. Not heavier. Just honest. She rested her head against my shoulder this time, calmer than I'd ever seen her. I wrapped my arm around her and felt her relax into it like she'd finally stopped negotiating with herself. Neither of us said this is right or this is okay. We didn't need to. We'd already chosen. And for the first time, neither of us tried to step back from it.